My name is Abigail, and I can share a story that has been gnawing at me for many years. It all started when I was 6 or 7. At that time, I still did not understand how fragile the world in which I grew up was, and that childhood innocence was not able to protect us from what fate was preparing for our family. That year, my parents separated. My father, Harold, could no longer cope with the endless reproaches and injections that poisoned our house. Harold was a man who seemed to have no enemies. Everyone loved his easy laugh and kindness, his way of listening and supporting. But his good nature turned into weakness for him in front of his mother, Isabella. She was a woman with bright, sharp features, her eyes always burned with icy hardness, and her voice was so strong that it left no doubt about her determination. She demanded more from the world and the people around her than they could give. My father was often a victim of her dissatisfaction. For years, Isabella criticized her father for not earning enough, never missing an opportunity to remind him of his, as she considered, insignificant achievements. I remember the day he came home happy, with shining eyes, because he had been promoted. His face shone with pride. He talked so enthusiastically about his new position, as if this news could change our whole world. But as soon as he told his mother, her look changed, and she only said coldly, as if with disdain, "Is that all? I thought you finally found a real job." The joy that shone in his father's eyes disappeared instantly, as if someone had put out a fire. It was like a balloon slowly deflating, losing shape and color until only an empty shell remained. I didn't understand exactly what was happening at the time, but I clearly saw the pain in his eyes, the resentment that he couldn't hide. He left shortly after that. Now that I'm older, I can understand why. But then it seemed like the end of everything I knew, the destruction of the world that was the only home of my heart. Mom accepted his departure as a new chance, and soon turned our family drama into a tool for receiving pity and support. She told everyone around her what a poor single mother she was, how hard it was for her without her husband, who allegedly left us with nothing. I often watched her go to work with a sad face, as if under the pressure of an unbearable burden. In front of her boss, Mr. Frank, she didn't seem like the kind of woman who made scenes at home, but fragile, in need of support. "I'm sorry I'm late again, Mr. Frank," she said, rubbing her eyes with a napkin. "Abigail was sick, and I had no one to help." She looked at him, squeezing out fake tears, and he comforted her by patting her hand and assuring her that everything was fine. While I was at home watching cartoons, I had no idea that I was an unwitting part of this performance. But the family gatherings were the worst. My mother came into the spotlight, bright and confident, and told all our friends how my father abandoned us, how he left us with nothing. She did it with such tragedy that it became unbearable to me. I knew it wasn't true. My father always sent money, regularly sent alimony, and called every time to make sure that the check had arrived. But every time my mother received this money, she waved it in front of me like insignificant crumbs and said with contempt, "Look at this, Abigail. Does your father think that's enough to raise a child? What a pathetic handout." At the time, I didn't know what it was supposed to mean. I didn't know if it was enough for us or not. I only saw that Mom was angry, and when she was angry, my life turned into a real nightmare. As I got older, I began to notice that her look at me changed, as if sometimes a cold light of dislike flashed in her eyes, as if she saw something in me that she didn't like. Later, when I got older, I realized that this hidden hostility in my mother's eyes was caused by my resemblance to my father. In my smile, in the way I spoke, and even in simple gestures, she saw the reflection of a man she had long wanted to get rid of. These memories were for her a painful reminder of the time when she was addicted, when her life did not match her own ambitions. And yet she kept me with her because I was useful, the image of a struggling, single mother without a brave, little daughter, which aroused sympathy and support from others. It brought her certain benefits. She managed to get not only moral support, but also some financial assistance from the state, and for a while her mother was satisfied. But when I turned 10, everything suddenly changed. Jack Rich came into our lives, a successful and prosperous man, and my role changed. Mom didn't want to look poor and unhappy anymore. Now she wanted to be the devoted wife of a successful man, and for that I became an unnecessary part of the picture. At first, I didn't even notice these changes until the little things started to accumulate. She increasingly forgot to wash my clothes, and I started my day at school feeling humiliated because of the crumpled and stale uniform. The children laughed and whispered, pointing at me with their fingers, and I, with my head down, tried to hide from their ridicule. Then the food problem started. Mom cooked delicious dishes for herself and Jack, such that the house was filled with warm and inviting smells that whetted my appetite. But as soon as I approached the table, she would say, slightly apologetically, "Oh, Abigail, I'm sorry, I completely forgot to cook for 3. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich?" And I would go into the kitchen, picking up a peanut butter and jam sandwich, while I could hear the sound of their laughter, clinking glasses, and light conversations. My simple meal seemed even less significant against the background of their festive meals. But the most painful thing began when she interfered with my school affairs. I spent hours working on the project, trying to prove to myself that I could succeed, but every morning before school, as if by magic, the project disappeared. I came to class empty-handed, and when the teacher asked me where my job was, I could only shrug helplessly. The teachers looked at me with concern, and the grades were falling. And Jack didn't seem to notice anything. He was always busy with work, and if he was at home, then all his attention was absorbed by his mother. She took care of him with such sincerity and warmth, as if her whole life revolved around him. "Darling, you work so hard," she said, gently massaging his shoulders. "You deserve a break." He looked at her, fascinated, and replied, "What would I do without you, Isabella?" Their mutual adoration was painfully obvious, and I felt like a shadow, unnoticeable and unnecessary. And then something happened that changed everything completely. Mom announced that she was expecting a baby. Jack was overjoyed, and Mom did everything possible to immerse herself in the role of a caring and fragile pregnant wife. She often said that the doctor advised her to rest a lot. While she was lying on the couch, I was cleaning the house, washing dishes, doing laundry, coping with the work that, as I understood it, was now placed on my shoulders. When Jack returned home, she would slowly get up, swaying her stomach, and wearily say, "Oh, honey, I'm so tired. Raising a child is so hard." Jack immediately started fussing around her, and all I could do was bring water and fulfill requests. Gradually, I became more and more lonely, moving away from my school friends, to whom I could not explain why I did not want to invite them to my house. I was ashamed of the house in which I was a stranger, devoid of warmth and love. One night, lying in my room, I heard Mom and Jack excitedly discussing what color wallpaper to choose for the nursery, and how they wanted to arrange the toys. The feeling of uselessness became unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore. Trembling, I picked up the phone and dialed my father's number. The day of the funeral dragged on endlessly, every moment as if in a thick fog. The crowd gathered at the small church, their faces merging into one sea of sorrow and regret. I looked at the coffin covered with white lilies, and each flower seemed to me a symbol of everything that Dad had put into my life: his devotion, love, kindness. People came up to express their condolences, the words drowned in the soft hum of voices. I nodded mechanically and thanked him, although everything that was happening seemed completely unreal, as if I myself was standing somewhere on the sidelines, watching myself from the sidelines. Mom stayed close, unusually quiet, with a face full of restrained sadness. During all this time, I still did not understand whether this sadness was genuine or an artful mask, developed over years of pretending. However, when she approached people, her gaze was soft, even thoughtful, and her hand rested gently on Brian's shoulder, who seemed uncomfortable in this environment of someone else's pain. I noticed how she once furtively wiped away a tear while looking at the coffin. Something warm flickered in my chest, but immediately went out under the weight of old resentments and disappointments. When the ceremony was over, I was left alone, standing in front of the coffin. Suddenly it became unbearably hard for me to realize that Dad, my only true ally, was gone forever. The moment my hand touched the cold wood of the coffin, something inside me seemed to burst into small pieces. Tears welled up, and I couldn't help it. All the memories, every moment with him, his smile, his wise advice, even his quiet, supportive looks, all came back to me with terrifying clarity. The world around him seemed to freeze, and only the sound of his own sobs filled the silence. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Mom. She stood a little to the side, not daring to approach. Her gaze was fixed on me, and to my surprise, I saw something like understanding in it. She took a step forward, and before I could realize what was happening, her arms wrapped around me. For a moment, I allowed myself to succumb to that touch, almost forgetting about all our past quarrels and resentments. Her embrace was unusually warm and soft, the way it probably should have been all these years. But even in this moment of vulnerability, the thought flashed through her mind that this was temporary, that this was just a mask that she had put on for the funeral. And yet, that thought receded, leaving me standing next to my mom like two lost souls, holding on to the remnants of something that may never have been fully given to us. I stood at the window of my office, peering into the lights of the night city, as if in their flickering I could find answers to unsolvable questions that had long burned my soul. After Dad's death, life has become like a constant movement in a fog. Everything seems familiar, but it is always hidden, as if at arm's length, that I cannot step over. I thought about what he'd said, that he wanted me to live for real, but what did that mean now that he was gone? I couldn't help but think that his hope for my happiness and success was part of a deeper, endless trust in my abilities and intuition, which he always considered my strengths. That's why I held on to his legacy so stubbornly, trying to strengthen and develop his company, as if this was the last thing that connected us, despite the weight of new responsibilities and demands. And now, when I was in his office, sitting at the table where he had once planned the future, the ghost of the past stood in front of me again, my mother, Isabella. Her sudden call asking me to finance a trip to Europe reawakened the old bitterness and distrust in me, which I tried to stifle. I closed my eyes, and it was as if I had returned to a few months ago, when she appeared at the funeral, like a strange, unexpected guest, after so many years of absence. I hoped so much then that her participation would become a symbol of some kind of reconciliation, an attempt to heal old wounds, but with each new conversation with her, I became more and more convinced that for her, as before, only her own interests were important. "Abigail, dear," I remembered her words, so soft and caring, but no matter how passionately she uttered them, she could not hide her true tone. "It's been a long time since we spent time with the whole family. Brian would be so happy to go to Europe. He studies so hard, he deserves it so much. You want him to have the opportunity to see the world, don't you?" She said, as if our relationship had not suffered from the past, as if she had never distanced herself from me, had not pushed me out of her life. As if this call was a simple request from a mother to her daughter, and not another step towards manipulation. I felt my heart tighten. It seemed that even after so many years of estrangement in a complicated relationship, I still needed her approval, in her presence. To some extent, her participation and regular calls became an illusion of support for me, which I lost along with Dad. And I really wanted to have a family, even with Isabella. Sometimes it seemed to me that I was ready to close my eyes to her flaws, to her self-interest, in order to feel the warmth of a loved one at least for a while. But these conversations, steeped in hidden hints of financial difficulties, reminded me more and more of her long-standing manipulations, how for years she chose her benefits and comfort instead of me. Now, months later, everything that started with minor requests, to pay for SAT preparation courses for Brian, to buy a new laptop for Isabella, began to turn into a habit. She got used to receiving my help, and I, feeling needed, more and more succumbed to her requests. It seemed that her caring words, her expression of gratitude, had become a kind of drug that I unknowingly got hooked on, thinking that this kindness was sincerity. But deep down I knew the truth. I knew that her concern had limits, that her maternal affection returned to me only as long as she needed something from me. And on this Sunday afternoon, when I, tired and immersed in reports, listened to her request for financing a trip to Europe, something clicked in me. Suddenly, all these years of my struggle, my sacrifices, and most importantly, all the disappointments that I once tried to leave behind, all at once came flooding back to me. Anger and pain exploded inside me, like a long-locked storm that was just waiting for its turn to break out. I was standing on a dark street, surrounded by the cold walls of a city in which I once felt confident and calm, but now it seemed to me that all this was an illusion that disappeared in an instant. The apartment that I had furnished with such care, which I called my home, was treacherously sold by the person from whom I expected the last, from my own mother. Now I stood all alone, left with a terrible emptiness inside, but at the same time with a rage that flared up, capturing every thought, every nerve in my body. How could she? I shouted in my mind, clutching the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. How could she so easily, so meanly deprive me of the last thing that connected me with my former world? It was unbearably painful to me, as if my whole life, all the years of trying to understand her, forgive her, find in her actions at least a drop of love and care, all this turned out to be a lie. She didn't leave me anything, and even our blood relationship seemed like an empty phrase right now. Isabella, my mother, the name left a bitter taste on my tongue now. I stood in a daze for a long time, until my thoughts began to form a clear line. I will not leave this like this, I promised myself mentally. I knew that it would be difficult to return the apartment, that I might have to face a lengthy lawsuit, but it became a matter of principle for me. I couldn't let her destroy everything I was building. I couldn't let her get the better of me again. I pulled myself together, took a deep breath and did what was the first logical step in this situation. I called my lawyer. The sound of the beep seemed unbearably long, until finally I heard a familiar voice on the other end of the line. My lawyer was a man who had been tested for years, and I knew that if anyone could help me deal with this nightmare, it would be him. John, this is Abigail. I have an emergency, my voice trembled, but the determination in it was undeniable. I briefly explained the situation to him, trying to keep myself in control and not let my emotions overwhelm me. He listened without interrupting, and then quietly but firmly said, Abigail, I understand how hard it is for you right now, but the first thing we have to do is request all the documents for the sale. I'll get on it right away, and you try not to make rash decisions. It's going to be a long process, but we'll get through it. We will find out on what basis your apartment was sold and what can be done. His words cooled my rage a bit, giving me back at least a little bit of control. Yes, I didn't have my own house right now, but I still had a chance to get it back. I said goodbye to John and exhaled, trying to collect my thoughts. The evenings in my new home have become quiet and truly peaceful. I stopped feeling cornered, drowned out by fear and guilt. Everything that happened to Isabella seemed to be something alien and distant, like a dark page that I finally turned over, although the scars, of course, remained. I often woke up at night remembering her voice, the cold contempt in her words that I had been trying to forget for so long, and sometimes it was hard for me to accept that it was a part of my life. I tried to understand where I had made mistakes myself, but I found only old memories, echoes of pain that had once been hidden deep. Now that the trial is over and justice has been served, there has come a moment of silence, which I have been chasing so hard, but which, nevertheless, turned out to be unexpected. Working for Dad's company required full commitment. I plunged into every detail, from signing new contracts to managing financial flows, and this activity became for me not just a job, but a way to find myself, to determine who I am now, without her shadow. Sometimes I sat at his old desk in the office, imagining how he would cope with a particular task, how he would react to current issues, and it seemed to me that I became closer to him, understanding his principles and views more deeply than ever before. As for Brian, we really started building a relationship that I hadn't even imagined before. Despite all the difficulties and deception, he turned out to be a sincere and kind person who wants to learn and build his own path. I was proud of him, and although our meetings were rare, I felt every time that our bond was growing stronger. I knew how much the trial with his mother had affected him, and I wanted him to know that I would always support him no matter what happened. My new house is small but cozy, surrounded by trees, and every corner of it has become a symbol for me that I can start over. In the evenings, returning from a long day, I would sit on the terrace with a cup of tea, enjoying the silence that had eluded me for so long. It became my ritual, my opportunity to relax, thank myself for the path I've traveled, and remind me that life goes on. As for Isabella, her traces disappeared from my life, leaving a void that I learned to fill with other things: friends, work, self-improvement. Deep down, I sometimes try to imagine how my life would have turned out if I had a different mother, a different experience, but, frankly, it didn't matter to me now.